Hi, hello everyone. So this is the video dealing with section 4.7, inverse trigonometric functions. Now, in the previous video, we discussed the functions on the right triangle. So here, as a quick reminder, here is a right triangle. We looked at this angle theta, and then we understand that on the right triangle, this is my hypotenuse. Uh, this is my adjacent side, and this is my opposite side. And then we define all of the, basic three functions, sine, cosine, and tangent, using these values. For example, in case of sine, sine of theta is the opposite side over hypotenuse. So now the question comes, how do I find what if I want to find the angle theta? Right, so we've discussed this in the previous video that we would use the inverse function, right? So theta would be, in this case, sine inverse. And again, this notation does not represent sine raised to a negative power, right? It's just the notation for inverse sine. So sine inverse of whatever value that we're interested in. In this case, this value right here. Okay, now sine inverse or cosine inverse or tangent inverse or any of the other functions inverse, it's a function. Now, if it is a function, you remember that every function has to pass the vertical line test. And what is that vertical line test? So if I have a function, let's say this function, this graph represents a function if it passes the vertical line test. So here's my vertical line test. As I am passing this vertical line either to the left or to the right, the graph is a function if the vertical line intersects the graph at only one x value. Okay, so for example, this is a function, but take a look at this other one. If I have something like this, here's my vertical line, and it crosses in multiple places. So this is not a function. Now, the problem with trigonometric functions is that they are what we call periodic. So here is the sine, for example. Sine will look like this. And so we may have a problem with this because it's going to repeat. So we can't have that. So in order to avoid this issue with sine inverse not being a function, once we invert it, the function is going to look like this, the sine inverse, and obviously it's going to fail at multiple places. So to do that, we have to always restrict the domain. So for the sine function, for the inverse sine function, the domain has to go from negative pi over 2, which is negative 90 degrees, to pi over 2, which is 90 degrees. So here's my unit circle. Let me show you. The sine function, this is the unit circle. Okay, unit circle being the radius is 1. This y-axis is our sine. So y equals sine axis. So normally we call this axis the y, but now it is the sine x function. So the sine inverse function goes from here, 90 degrees, to here, minus 90 degrees. So I can only evaluate the sine function in this range. It's unfortunate that we have to remember um, these things. Now, on an exam, I am not going to, give you complicated, weird questions where I test your knowledge to find the inverse sine of an angle that is right here, right? So I'm not going to do that. But you still have to remember that this is the case. Okay, so one of the issues, as we discussed in the previous video, is that uh, if we give you a question where you have to find the angle of some weird value, we cannot memorize every single angle. So this needs to be done with the calculator, okay? But values of known angles have to be memorized, okay? We have absolutely no option in that. This is the way we do things in mathematics. Now, and I told you about this table before. I showed you how to derive it in a previous video, but it is easier if we just memorize it. So we have to know 0, 30, 45, 60, and 90, okay, for sine. All right, and it's just unfortunate that we have to do that. I guess if you spend a few minutes, you memorize it very quickly because it's somewhat symmetric. You can see, you know, the symmetry between 0 and 90, or between 30 and 60, and how 45 works. Okay? Unfortunately, it has to be memorized. Now, notice that all these values are positive, and I may be given a value here that is either positive or negative. So now, when you are given a question like this, sine of 30 degrees, this is very important that you understand the difference. When you're being asked sine of 30 degrees, this is what you are being asked. Okay? Let me go to the unit circle again. So here is 30 degrees. Let's imagine that this is 30 degrees. Okay? When you're asked this question, this is what your answer should be. They want you to find this blue line right here. Okay? This length is sine of 30 degrees. So this is the answer to this is going to be a value. When you're asked sine inverse, okay, of 0.5, this is what you are being asked. Let me show you. So they are telling you that this length here is 0.5, and they want you to find the angle. So this question, the inverse, is always going to be find me the angle. Whereas this question here is find me the value, okay, whose sine of that angle equals the value. All right, does that make sense? So all of the questions dealing with sine inverse, cosine, tangent, and all of the other ones, you are going to be looking for the angle. Now, there's two possibilities, like I said before. If it is an unknown angle, we need a calculator. If it is one of these angles that we are supposed to know, the ones down here, we must know the exact value. Okay? And in the case of sine that we're going to do right now, we have to adjust for the domain of right up here from positive 90 degrees to negative 90 degrees. Okay, so let's take a look. So sine inverse of square root of 2 divided by 2. It's positive, so I am here somewhere. Okay, and now I have to look at this table, which has to be memorized, and find out on sine which value is square root of 2 over 2. Well, obviously it's 45. So this answer is 45. So on questions like this, there is no work to show. You just show me the answer. There's nothing else to do. Okay. Second question. Sine inverse negative 1/2. So because this is, again, the sine axis, right? This is all positive. This is all negative because it's below the origin. This is the origin, right? It's just like the y-axis. So above the x-axis, you have positive y values. Below the x-axis, you have negative values. So negative 1/2 means you're here somewhere. Okay, so now I just have to look for the 1/2 for sine. So here it is. Okay, and the angle is 30 degrees. Now, you cannot write here 30 degrees because 30 degrees is above, is here. And we are not here because the answer is negative. So you are here somewhere. So it's 30 degrees below. Okay? And you might be thinking, well, Professor, then this is 360 degrees minus 30, 330 degrees. Yeah, that's okay, but this is not allowed because, again, the domain of sine inverse goes from minus 90 to 90. So the answer you have to give is not 330, is minus 30. Okay? Because that's what the domain is. The function does not exist at negative 330. So sine is very straightforward. Okay? Let's take a look at this one. Again, we look at the table for now, but eventually we memorized it. All right. On the unit circle, the highest value sine x can be is positive 1, and the smallest value can be is negative 1. So at negative 1, I am down here. Okay. So I go look at the table where I have 1. Remember, the table is only going to show positive values. So here's 1 for sine, and it's associated with a degree of 90. But I am in the negative. So obviously this is minus 90. Okay. And this one, here's another negative. Square root of 3 over 2. It's associated with the angle of 60. Because it's negative, the answer is minus 60 degrees. Now, if it was positive, obviously I would be here somewhere, and then it would be positive 60 degrees. Okay, so unfortunately, this table we have to memorize. There is no choice. All right, now let me ask you, just to clarify things, what if they said something like this? Sine inverse 2. What would the answer be? The value is not in the table, right? It's not in the table. So you could try to go to the calculator but the calculator is going to say error. The reason being is that this value is not possible, right? The maximum sine can be is from -1 to 1. This is the sine axis. There's nothing above it. Okay, so this is not possible. You could write does not exist. I am not going to give you a question like this. Okay, but so you know, so that you know how to find these inverse functions. Okay, so this is sine inverse. The most important thing that you have to remember is that the y-axis is the sine axis, and the function goes from -90 degrees to 90 degrees. And our answer for the angle is going to be bounded by these two values. For the known values, we have to know the table. For unknown values, like this, for example, we have to use the calculator. Okay, as we've seen before, and I'm going to show you in the last video. So this is the sine inverse function.